I've put in about 30 hours on the Diablo 4 beta. I feel like I'm in a good place to talk about the good things it does and some of the questions it raises. My overall feeling after putting in almost 3 days straight into the beta is that the foundations are there for Diablo 4 to be an excellent iteration of the series. Now, if you're expecting a revolution from Diablo 4, a jump into a more modern take of the genre, you'll be left disappointed. This is as Diablo as it gets. Yes, it's got MMO features. Yes, you can see other people in the game world, but at its core, it's Diablo. I know that sounds stupid, but I feel like some people were maybe expecting a jump or a change of direction or a complete shift in the core gameplay loop. Well, actually, it feels like here Blizzard have doubled down on what makes Diablo so Diablo. Initially, I actually came into Diablo 4 expecting maybe a bit of lost art content, a bit of raiding style mechanics, but the more I played the beta, the more I got into that Diablo mindset, and the more it brought back memories of Diablo 2 and 3, games which I grew up on. And I remember that Diablo really, at its core, was always a solitary experience with optional multiplayer elements. And therefore, I think it's very hard to put massive mechanics like, Vicus Gate 3 or Valton Gate 2 in Diablo, because everything needs to be soloable. That's just the nature of Diablo. You're alone in this dark world against evil. And I think once I made peace with that, I was okay with some of the choices that Blizzard have made. Now, saying that, I'm not okay with all the choices they've made, and we're going to break this down very simply into two sections. We're going to do the good, of which there's plenty, and we're going to do the issues or the questions the beta raises. Now, you're going to hear this next point a lot in this video, and that is, we just don't know yet because we've only been given the first 25 levels of the game. As a hardcore looter, I don't know how you can come to any solid conclusions based on what you've seen in the beta. Everything everybody says, including myself, is simply a projection of what you've played in the beta. Now, of course, like anybody who's guessing about something that might happen in the future, you might be right. I might be wrong. I might be right, but nobody can say with any certainty. You might argue that a lot of what I'm saying comes from a sentimental point of view. Diablo 2, Lord of Destruction, Reaper of Souls, Diablo 3, all of that stuff are just huge parts of my life. I love the franchise. It has a lot of emotional weight to me, so maybe a lot of my positivity and a lot of my hope for the future of the game comes from a place of sentimentality. If you didn't play Diablo before and you played the beta, let me know if you felt any of the things I felt, or if it just felt very old school to you. Okay, enough of the intro. Let's get into the good and then we'll go into the issues. Quick one on the giveaways before we get into the issues. We did give away 5 copies of Diablo, including beta keys and deluxe editions. If you're a winner, you have either been contacted by email address or sent a friend request on battle.net or contacted through Twitch. Check your private messages. If I've messaged you, reply back to me and let's get you the digital deluxe copy over. Alright, let's get into the video. So the core point I want to make about Diablo 4 is quite simply, it's really fun to play. Everything fits together beautifully. The animations, the sound design, the visual style and art direction, the world building through the storytelling, and that feeling of isolation. Even though the world is shared, it still feels like a dark, solitary journey. It's brilliant to see other players out in the world or at towns or strongholds. And the world events can be a nice punctuation to a solitary experience at times. There are large parts of the itemization I loved in the beta, however it does raise a lot of questions which I'll touch on in the next section. I've heard varying comments on the legendaries, and I think there's one thing we need to make clear, and the developers did touch upon this in the live streams, and that is that the legendaries are not made to be the cornerstone of your builds. The unique items are the cornerstone to your builds. The legendaries are the fuel to the unique items. Now, there was no unique items in the beta, not that I found any. I don't think they were actually in the beta whatsoever. There was a lot of legendaries, however. Personally, I thought the legendaries were interesting, but it's very hard to just say how interesting they are until you see the uniques and you see how those uniques integrate with the capstones. Now, the capstones are a part of your skill tree which again were not available in the beta, and the capstones push you into a specific class fantasy. So there were large chunks missing from the build element of Diablo 4, and thus it's really hard to get down how Diablo 4 will play at the end game. A lot has been made about the sheer volume of dungeons in Diablo 4, and the beta had 22 and I went into every single one. Though high on atmosphere on style, they do have issues. But the big question is, can they be repeated and can they remain fresh? Again, it's so hard to tell because it's early game. We haven't got any nightmare sigils, we've not got any repeatable dungeons. All of this stuff is only going to be known in the full release of the game. I guess my job is to tell you what my gut tells me. What do I think Diablo 4 is going to end up like? And going back to my initial point of my sentimentality, I believe, stroke hope, they're going to get it right. I believe there will be enough variety with the different affixes in the dungeons to keep it fresh until the seasons come on and act as a specific reset. The world boss was excellent and really did feel like an event in the community, especially as everybody streamed it on Twitch and everyone got together and watched each other try and complete it. The open world element of Diablo 4 with the world map and the area you were given in the beta is an intriguing and fun playground for the game. World events and live events bring the player base together and feed into further loot mechanics. Now it remains to be seen just how effective things such as the Altars of Lilith or filling out your Codex of Power are for leveling up alternate characters. I guess we will find out in beta weekend 2 when I push through a necromancer and druid over the open access beta. Another positive I want to talk about is grouping up and going through this world with a party. I only did it for about 4 hours, but it was so much fun. I had such a good time with Diablo 4 as a solo player, but in a party it was kind of just going around with your squad, you know, your boys, and just absolutely trashing everything. Again, just going back to the first point I made in this video, it's enjoyable. It's hard to quantify that. I'm just telling you, get a group of people together, different classes or same classes or whatever, and just go around and just melt through dungeons, picking up gear, go to world events in the open world, go to the live events, the invasions, the world bosses, and just experience it as a group. I have to also mention how enjoyable it was just to play a genuine looter again, where the loot drops are from killing enemies and experiencing that item drop, the sound effect hit. It was great just to feel that again. I feel like I've not done that in so long. Ooh. Is that a amulet or something? Yeah, it is. Nice. Whoa, look at that. Holy shit. With so many games hiding their loot behind vendors or behind RNG or behind completing 5,000 raids or auction houses, and yes, Diablo was guilty of that too, I'm well aware. It's just great to be part of something where dungeon crawling and something dropping and immediately you go, ooh, nice, and you think, well, what's that? You know, it's fantastic. That's something I missed, and I knew I missed it, and playing Diablo 4 just made me completely accept the fact that I'd missed it. Talking of loot and drops, first of all, having rare drops be god rolls or be one of your core sources of best in slots. I said it was genius in another video I did, and I really feel that having played the game now for many hours, it is an excellent choice because every rare can be an improvement on your build, every single one. On top of that, the decision to bring back plus skills is another fantastic addition because that allows you to either pull skill points out and let your plus skill do the work for you and then put those skill points elsewhere, or just overpower a skill to beyond its capacity. In some cases, it can even give you access to skills you never had before, and therefore allowing you to put points elsewhere or do a build in a specific way that just wouldn't be possible with the skill points available, and I really like that. Sorry, just to go back to the world, I forgot to say something. The world is massive. I mean, the starting area is big enough. This is a map that has been leaked of the whole game world. It is absolutely huge. And if you think about it, due to the scaling of the enemies, the whole of this map is going to be the end game, not just one area. And that's a positive of the scaling. We'll talk about the negatives in a second. So overall, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of hope that Blizzard can build on these very solid foundations they've presented in the beta. Maybe it's just same old Blizzard, getting us excited and just offering an empty shell of an experience. So into the issues and the questions that those issues raise. Now I guess that's the problem when you have a beta that's about 10% of the game. You're often left wondering about what's further down the path. In no particular order then, let's get into some of the issues I see the game having now that it may have in the future. Respec cost was a hot topic pre-beta, and I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. Diablo offers you so many legendaries and so many varieties and variances on your skills and abilities, it's hard not to always want to tinker with your skill tree, all of which costs you gold. The problem with this is it stifles player creativity, as you wonder whether it's not even worth the hassle respecking and spending gold when you may not even like the build the new legendary opens up. I really wish this would be rethought by Blizzard and they don't die on this hill of having respecking as a gold sink, because there's plenty of other gold sinks in the game. The next issue or worry I think many players have will be the variety in the endgame content, more specifically the boss variety. I think to some extent we all kind of expect the dungeon crawling aspect of Diablo. Killing enemies quickly, fighting elites that drop good items that have affixes that make them significantly harder to fight. But since the last Diablo, ARPGs have ventured into the territory of having very mechanic heavy bosses. Though Diablo does dip its toes in this territory, it has to kind of straddle the line between keeping everything soloable while also making it more than just a loot pinata to throw your skills at. Now, from what I could tell, there was about 5-6 bosses on rotation in these dungeons in Act 1. But one of the bigger issues actually in these dungeons is the objectives and just how, well, kind of mind-numbing they are. Walking from one end to another, picking up a key, slotting it in a gate, opening the gate. In the beta, your standard objectives are kill a bunch of structures, insert 2 objects in a gate, kill some watchmen for a key, collect the souls of enemies, or free prisoners. I guess I'd have less of an issue with it if they didn't ask you to go back and forth in these huge dungeons. Following on from that, I have seen some people criticize the lack of randomization. For me, that's not an issue. I mean, the amount you're going to be running these dungeons, I really don't think you're running them that amount of times because of randomization. Really doesn't bother me. And in fact, sometimes knowing the layout is better, especially if they're going to have you doing these objectives. It'll definitely make it less painful. Though the world boss was fantastic, I do wish there was a level gate on the world boss instance. In my 2 runs, we had level 8s, level 9s, level 12s, level 15s, basically just dying. Even at level 23, which is the lowest level I went at to the world boss, even I was getting killed quickly. And if you have, let's say, 5 or 6 very low level characters, it becomes much harder to do, unless you're playing one of the broken builds in the beta, which nicely leads me into balance. What balance? The barbarian is significantly harder to play than the other 2 classes in the beta. Being in melee range of attacks that decimate your health bar put the barbarian at a significant disadvantage. The rogue and sorc both have builds that are either AFK easy mode or just absolutely broken DPS tanks. This most definitely needs looking at, or this maybe gets fixed in the endgame when more legendaries and more stats are available. Talking of items and legendaries, there's just not enough inventory space for the amount of items that drop in Diablo. Having to teleport back to town every 5 seconds to dump all your inventory out and to sort it all out is not good design. They either need to put the gems in a completely separate bag and increase the inventory space, or triple the inventory space. You easily fill 2 whole inventory bags worth of items in a dungeon run easily. What makes that worse is that you cannot see stats of items while they're on the ground, therefore you're picking everything up because you don't want to miss anything. Now the other option is to stop, put an item in the inventory, compare it to what's already in your inventory, then drop on the floor what you don't need, but I mean, come on. Who's going to do that? So itemization and crafting then, following on from legendaries. I liked the itemization and crafting system. However, what I didn't like was the fact that once you get an aspect and put it on an item, you cannot then remove that aspect off the item you've put it on. Now this leads to a core issue, which is that in the leveling process, you're going to be making a build while you level, and that build is pretty much going to be dead once you put on another item that increases your overall strength, because you're going to have to get the legendary to drop again if the legendary is not in your codex of power. And this begs the question, how many of the legendary powers will not be in the codex of power? Even if they are, you only get those from specific dungeons in specific areas. So the leveling process just might be a bit weird, where you kind of make this build you like. You're obviously going to equip items with a higher power level, but then lose the legendary you've infused onto the item. So it begs the question, in the leveling process, what's the point of putting the legendary aspect on there? Okay, from your codex of power, not a problem, but if you get an aspect that isn't in the codex of power, well, why would you even put it on the item? Now there is the ability to upgrade items from the blacksmith. Now I didn't have enough gold to upgrade my items all the way through. I got to about level 3 and the stat upgrades didn't seem big enough at that point to validate the cost. Now happy to be proven wrong on that, and I hope I am wrong, because then that would make sense when it comes to building through the leveling process. Then we've got sort of minor niggles, I guess you could call it. No overlay map, which I thought was bizarre. I mean, it was like so odd when I pressed the map key and it wasn't an overlay map. I mean, that's how you play these games. I scoured the options to see if, you know, it had been turned off by default, but it just wasn't there. If it was in the game, let me know in the comments, but I'm pretty certain that wasn't in the game. And it's a crazy choice, if you ask me. Scaling as well, so the map and the enemy scale with your level. This I think it has more negative effects than positive effects. If you want to scale the dungeons with the level, fine, but the overworld seems, I don't know, it would kind of ruin the power curve. As you get stronger with your items and your builds, you're actually not going to feel like you're getting stronger because the enemies are going to take the exact same amount of time to kill because they're leveling up with you. I think this is a problem. We'll see how it looks like on release. But I want to feel more powerful as I invest in stats, invest in builds, invest in passives, as I upgrade my gear. So we'll see how that one pans out in the long term. Because I think long term, it made great players who are putting so much time in and they don't feel like they're getting stronger equivalent to the amount of time they're sinking into Diablo. But the biggest question still remains. What does the endgame of Diablo 4 look like? Just how many uniques and legendaries are truly build altering and gameplay defining? And how many of those builds actually have a place in the end game? What does the seasonal model look like? What variety and switch-ups does the seasonal model bring to the endgame loop of Diablo? How complex are its endgame systems? I've seen some people criticize Diablo 4 for being too simple. It's definitely not too simple, but it definitely is a more streamlined version of more hardcore games, and that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, I'm not here to claim Diablo 4 is the be-all and end-all of ARPGs, because like the thumbnail says, I feel like the beta left me with more questions than answers. Not in a bad way, but because I enjoyed it so much, I'm now more inquisitive. I'm more geared to ask, well, is this going to build on the solid foundations, the excellent combat, the fantastic sound design, the brilliant atmosphere in the world? And I do feel like Blizzard got that feeling of being alone, but also being in an open world with other players just right. There's a balance there. So really, all eyes are on the stream that Blizzard promised after the open beta, talking about the endgame and talking about what their plans are for the seasonal model. Judging on the 30 or so hours I put into the early access beta, it's clear to me that without the large endgame pinnacle goals that something like Lost Ark has, or the complex, intricate systems that something like Path of Exile has, now it doesn't mean Diablo 4 has to replicate those or imitate them, but it does mean that Diablo 4 needs to have something that acts as pinnacle content for players to get their teeth into, for players to work towards, and for players to overcome. Diablo 4 just might not have enough in its endgame loop to keep players plugged in, but we don't know what that endgame loop is yet. We don't even know 90% of the uniques in the game, or if the dungeons in the next 3 areas will pose vastly different challenges, whether it be in open world live events, world bosses, or dungeons, and if the Nightmare Sigil system for endgame dungeon running has enough originality or pinnacle challenge in it to keep players engaged and grinding. So yeah, look, the core is there for something quite special, especially when you look at the dungeon crawling looter genre and then you look at the quality of presentation on offer here. I think this could be a very enjoyable experience. Or maybe Blizzard and Activision are just the masters of getting us hyped and just feeding us enough information and enough juiciness to make us think it's going to be special, and maybe down the line it's just an empty shell of a game. I hope I'm wrong. I really do think there is the basis and foundation for some hope and positivity for what's to come. I'm not going to go anymore. This video's gone on for way too long, but there are my thoughts on the overall product which we've played and sunk our time into over the last 4 days. I need a break before the next beta starts, and we'll get into it all again from Friday. If you've got this far, I appreciate it. Thanks for getting to this point in the video. We're doing another 2 digital deluxe copies over the open beta. Follow on Twitch, jump in on the stream. There's a YouTube link down below in the description. Just fill that in. We'll go from there. I'm going to get some sleep. Take care.